Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you. Earlier, students from Canadian International School of Hong Kong performed as we entered the hall. We would like to thank the students for their very warm welcome performance. Ladies and gentlemen, the IB's Director of Outreach and Conferences, Mr. Haif Banayan.
Good morning. On behalf of everyone at the IB, I'd like to welcome you all to our Hong Kong Global Conference. We have a record number with us today, 1,800 of you, from dozens of countries and all our regions that the IB works in. We're welcoming school heads, program coordinators, teachers, and many, many more who are working with us as valued members of the global community. Welcome all of you, and thank you for making the effort to join us. Let me begin with talking briefly about the theme of the conference, Generation IB, a theme we've carefully selected to celebrate at all our conferences globally, because success and well-being of the future generation of students is what we have at the heart of the IB mission. Last year, during our 50th anniversary, our Generation IB campaign brought together students, IB students from all over the world to propose creative solutions for real-life problems. And they delivered inspiring initiatives, which we proudly highlighted through our communications and on our 50th anniversary website. In 2019, the spirit of Generation IB has grown into a theme that transcended throughout all of our global work, developing our students, inspiring our educators, and acknowledging the wider communities in which we work with. Because we believe that by advocating open-minded discussion, spearheading innovation, and promoting lifelong learning, our Generation IB will be a trailblazing success in an ever-changing economy and will make the world a better place. And IB will continue to be there, supporting them and driving positive education change for many years to come. When I look around and see you all here, distinguished educators who have come from wide and far, fueled with passion and commitment, I see this conference a visible proof of IB's greatest asset. You, our IB community that is joining here today, bound together by the IB mission to create a better world through education. You are joining us in this conference with shared commitment to learning and teaching, shared conviction that education truly makes a difference to the world, and the shared knowledge that we are making a difference that is felt every day, not only in the 140 countries we work in, but all over the world. More profoundly, we all have the shared belief that our excellent education should benefit as many students as possible, regardless of their socioeconomic backgrounds and where they come from. When we see developments in the world today, we see that our founding mission has proved enduring and ever more relevant. The IB strategy is built on innovation, service, and community in the context of putting schools first. Its continued appeal and relevance enabled IB to continue growing every successive year. This week, we celebrated our 5,000th school to our community. Thank you. That's a milestone along a road of growth that is steady and continuing as it has been since our foundation. This means that every month and every year, more students are able to benefit from the IB education, and we are touching their lives and positively impacting their future, so that every year, Generation IB becomes larger and a more varied community. And in this spirit, I welcome you again, and will now turn to the exciting schedule we have laid out for you. In the course of coming few days, you will see world-class speakers and presentations and have the opportunity to participate in sessions and workshops on a range of different topics. We're also proud of the diversity of keynote speakers we have invited to speak to you in the coming days, starting with Jamie Chu, who will talk on day one about the mental health of children in the context of schools that put a priority on students' well-being, but are unsure where the most impact can be made and what practices to consider. And on day two, we'll hear from Michael McQueen, who will discuss leadership in the area of the capability gap in today's students that may leave them ill-equipped for what lies ahead, and the key paradigm shift educators and school leaders will need to make to remain relevant in these turbulent times. And on day three, we have Jawahar Surisetti focusing on pedagogy and change and the best ways to mentor and mold Generation IB at schools and homes, and how to maximize their constructive output to create a generation of world leaders, and how parents and teachers could de-learn and relearn to be in sync with the desired outcomes. As a community of learners, we also continue to thrive by peer-to-peer sharing, and that's why we will also be hearing from the IB's future educators, a number of exceptional educators we want to celebrate because of their inspiring voices within their school communities. Educators who innovate on a daily basis and build the future of learning and teaching. So on day one, Belinda Greer will focus on teacher leadership and creating environments for students to develop skills and attributes of the IB learner profile. While Ali Wu will talk to us on day two about local communities and how they can best prepare for current and future generations of students. And Anthony Reish will discuss on day three service and giving students a sense of purpose by embedding experiences at school that will create opportunities for them to live, to love, to matter, so they can give back and be part of a solution. Alongside these speakers, we have organized over 80 breakout sessions on a rich range of topics, covering all three of our strategic pillars: innovation, service, and community. I think you'll agree that this is an inspiring lineup for our conference, and I'm greatly looking forward to hearing their new ideas and to discussing them with you over the coming days and beyond. I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of our many sponsors and exhibitors. 45 organizations are participating, and we truly value your presence. I'm also looking forward to meet and interact with associations of IB World Schools, and will continue to enjoy watching with you the wonderful students' performances from our IB World Schools over the 3 days. Thank you all for the hard work and your contributions to making this a hugely valuable and enjoyable conference. I hope that all of you enjoy these 3 days and that you will find it inspiring and useful. I know that you will be networking and meeting new people with whom to share ideas and plans. The importance of these connections we make here cannot be underestimated. They are part of our professional capital that you can only get when you come to an IB Global Conference. I know that all of us will leave this conference professionally enriched and more strongly connected to the community that is Generation IB, and hopefully continue to leverage the excellent IB education to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Let us all welcome on stage students from Creative Primary School. Thank you, Creative Primary School, for that very energetic performance. This year, we want to celebrate truly exceptional educators who are inspiring voices within their communities. Let us welcome on stage our featured speaker on leadership, the Chief Executive Officer of English Schools Foundation, Miss Belinda Greer.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and wow, what a welcome. Let's hear it again for the children from Creative Secondary School. Good morning, everyone. Now, standing here, looking out, I have to share, this is awe-inspiring. This is the largest audience group of teachers I've had the privilege to stand before. And I have to say, the youngest. What is it they say? You know you're getting old when policemen start looking young. I think the same is true for teachers. Generation IB is a great theme for our conference. It's a call to action. Action to our rapidly changing world. Just think, our students, the youngest in our primary schools, will be graduating from school in the 2030s. And our youngest teachers, many of you, if not replaced by robots, may still be teaching in the 2060s. Wow, it's hard to imagine what that world will look like. But it's time to reimagine a better education for today's generation. Incredible pace of change calls for greater velocity in our system. Now, we can have education systems that are fixed, and we have to fix children to fit into those systems. Or we can have systems that are adaptive, that teach children, that we meet their needs. So I think that reimagining education must start from what we know is working well. It needs to take account of the changing world around us, but it needs to be responsive to the needs of the generation. And therefore, I believe that reimagining education must be teacher-led. We know from research that the most important factor that contributes to student success is the teacher. The Japanese proverb, better than 1,000 days of diligent study is one day with a great teacher. Now, everyone has someone for them who is their great teacher. And let's just pause for a moment and think, who for you is that great teacher? I'm willing to bet that that great teacher is because of how they made you feel as a person, as well as a learner, much more than what they actually taught you. And while students themselves are the leaders of their own learning, it's you, the teachers, who create the conditions in which they will thrive or not. Who said this? I never teach my pupils, my students. Well, it was Einstein, way ahead of his time. And I think it's fair to say that the role of the teacher has shifted from didactic, traditional formal teaching to facilitating learning, showing students where to look, not telling them what to see. What really matters then for all of our students is that you, the teacher, you're creating the right conditions for them to learn. But here's the thing. How different is your classroom today compared to the classroom when you were a student in school? Because the world has changed. And creating conditions for today's generation needs to take account of this and the changing needs of our students. Technology is a game changer. Automation, artificial intelligence, they've redefined the value of knowledge. It's no longer the challenge for students to find the facts, to find the knowledge. It's making sense of what's real. We've all heard of fake news. And social media connects us like never before. And that brings great benefits, but also side effects. And that's why this conference is going to be important, thinking through the side effects of the advanced technology that our children now live with. It is a cliche, but it's true. We are preparing students for a future that we cannot imagine, to use technology not yet invented, and to find and solve problems we're not yet aware of. The future is uncertain. We know it's increasingly complex, and it's changing at an incredible pace. But here's the thing. Today's generation are not walking into that future. They are, and they will create it. And I suppose that, for me, is the main point. The leadership of reimagining education sits with teachers. It has to sit with teachers. We need teachers who can make sense of this increasingly complex world, to continuously refine what they do in class. Education conferences are great. We go, we find out new ideas. But they're not often focused enough at a level that makes a difference for you in your day-to-day practice. How often have you gone to a conference and been inspired, and then you go back to school and you get on with the busyness of the day job, and that's just an added pressure of things that you want to get to but just don't have the time? Professional learning has to be classroom-based, student-focused, teacher-led. And that's why today and the next 2 days are so important, because the IB conferences are focused. They do have depth, and most importantly, follow up the impacts on classroom practice. Let's be clear, if it isn't happening in the classroom, it isn't happening. And therefore, we need teachers who are consciously competent. Now, when I think about being consciously competent, I want to share a little story with you. Because when I was learning to drive, which I have to say wasn't yesterday, it happened to be at a time when I was reading research on teaching children to swim. And the research said that if a child went to daily lessons or weekly lessons, there was a difference. If a child went to a weekly swimming lesson, it would take, I can't remember the number, it was 30 lessons, say. But if the child went every day to daily lessons, it was half that. So I thought, great, I'm going to learn to drive, I'm going to apply this. So there I found myself sitting in the driving seat of the driving instructor's car. And I explained to him, I now need to have 10 lessons taken over the next 7 days because I have my driving test. And he said, okay, well, we always start by assessing your driving ability. I need to know and be confident that you're going to be test ready in 7 days. So he said to me, switch on and let's get going. To which I replied, and how do I do that? Now, he did take on the challenge, and I have to be honest, I did move from, I suppose, unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. I'm not quite sure if I was truly consciously competent, but I was competent enough to pass. But it is important that we remember how important having something front of mind. If it's sporadic, if we have one-off conferences, it doesn't impact on what we do in the classroom. Now, I have a metaphor, and I'm going to ask, I'm not sure if this really works, but I'm going to ask you to stay with me, because we have a picture here of 3 bridges. These are examples of engineering innovation. And I think my accents may be given away. It's a clue to where these bridges are. But these are bridges in Scotland, starting with the rail bridge, which was built in the 19th century. And if you didn't take the train across the rail bridge, you had to take a ferry. Then the bridge in the middle, that's the Forth Road Bridge, which made crossing by car much easier. But of course, nobody could predict the volume of traffic. And therefore, the third bridge, the one closest to us, that was opened just last year in the 21st century. Now, what we have is 3 bridges still serving a purpose. We didn't get rid of the bridge in the middle. But there's a changing landscape there. The conditions have changed. And I believe, like these 3 bridges, education needs to be responsive to change. It needs to be relevant for today, future-looking for tomorrow. But we need to hold on to the things that we know work and continue to be important. What matters today, then? Well, we're not preparing students for work, but we are preparing students for life. Today's generation, and the millennials, and many of you are millennials, have never lived without technology. But children born from 2010 are now Generation Alpha. They were born when the iPad was launched. I actually think they were born with iPads, because it's rare to see a young child now without an iPad. You go into restaurants and you groan when you see a family sitting beside you and the iPad comes out. But children who were born since 2010 have come into a world that's overrun with technology. In fact, I read something really sad the other day, that a child born as a Generation Alpha child said, "I'd rather have an iPad than a dog." Isn't that sad? But what we know about Generation Alpha is that they're going to process information faster than any other generation. And they're likely to have shorter attention spans. But they'll be better at switching between tasks and coping with multiple distractions going on in the background. Now, the jury's out whether you can multitask or not. And I know that females say that we are better multitaskers than males. But Generation Alpha are considered the first generation who will be the multitaskers. So what does that mean for us? Well, newly developing technology is resulting in an entire generation thinking and acting differently. And this, of course, impacts on their learning. Here we have something from the World Economic Forum, the Future of Jobs report. And what was really sobering about that report? It was published last year in 2018. It talked about the future, not away in the distant future. It talked about the future in 4 years' time. What's going to happen between now and 2022? And they predict a shifting in jobs. So they said about 78 million jobs would be displaced. But concurrently, at the same time, we would have 133 jobs created in the next 4 years. That's hard to imagine. We look at the automation all around us. Who would think that you'd be going into a supermarket and there are no staff, that everything will be automated? So we're not preparing students for work, but we can't ignore the shift, the increasing speed of change. The world is increasingly complex in terms of speed, connectivity, and global challenges. Now, whilst we might find this impossible, Generation Alpha will just see this as their world. And that has an impact on us as teachers, because we have competing priorities. We have dispositions, we have skills, we have our own schools' goals, learning goals, competencies. We now have skills growing in prominence that we have to take note of. We have to sit up and take account of. The curriculum is a framework, and the IB curriculum gives us a great framework with flexibility. It mustn't become a straitjacket. Loading the curriculum with anything more doesn't work. We need to teach students. We need to teach children, not teach the curriculum. And that's what needs to drive the curriculum, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our classrooms. But to a large extent, I would say assessment is still what drives the curriculum. And I'm not naive. I know that until universities start to look at their admissions, that we will still have to ensure that our students are attaining well and able to take next positive steps. But we as the teachers need to ask, what are we measuring? And what we measure today, is that so important in the long term? Now, I know many people will have heard Yong Zhao speak, and he would talk about unproductive success. So kids who can do really well in assessments and tests positively move on to whatever the university or work of their choice is. But he would say possibly that is productive failure. Because in the long term, the students, the young people themselves, are not confident, are not thriving. So here's the chance for us to truly create conditions, personalization and choice. And by that, I don't mean that every teacher has to go and now personalize the learning for every child. But what I do mean is that we create conditions in our classrooms that give each student choice, that they can personalize the learning. There's some great work happening in the ESF schools that I work for with the IBCP, the enhanced PYP, really opening up the curriculum, enabling us to truly teach the children and not feel that we're teaching the curriculum. We do need to focus on children's strengths and not focus purely on their deficiencies. So what's worth our time and who decides? Well, I think it relies on our teachers. We know that the quality of an education system, the quality of a school, cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. We know that the world is changing. We know that today's generation is different. We know we can't overload the curriculum, and we can't keep doing the same things. Artificial intelligence cannot meet the human element of effective learning, not yet anyway. We know that great teachers have caring relationships with their students. We know that they set high expectations. We know that they build on prior learning. We know that they give personalization and choice. We know that great teachers know their students well enough to teach them. Challenge is an exciting one. The change that we have to face, I believe, is an opportunity. The call for action is immediate. We need teachers who are consciously competent, not doing things so often in the same way that they don't have to think about it. We need teachers who are continuously learning. More than ever, we need teachers who see the child in everything that they do, and they care enough to challenge and reflect their own thinking on education. Finally, what matters? What really matters now and for the future? Well, I believe what really matters is great teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. We encourage everyone to post their questions real-time during the 3 keynote speeches via the Q&A button on the conference app. To do so, please click on the Schedule button, then click on the plenary session, and you will see the live Q&A feature available to you. Please welcome on stage Takdir Samtini and Lauren Lee, PYP students from the Canadian International School of Hong Kong, to say a few words about our keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I am Takdir Samtani, and this is Lauren Lee. We are grade 6 students at the Canadian International School of Hong Kong. We are honored to be here this morning to introduce you to your next keynote speaker of this International Baccalaureate Asia Pacific Conference.
Dr. Jamie Chu is a clinical psychologist who has worked with at-risk teens struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Chu's doctoral research was on factors that cause youth depression and suicide.
Dr. Chu is a co-founder of the Brightly Project, an initiative started in 2017. She developed software made to help at-risk teens connect with mental health support. As a result, Dr. Chu was recognized by Forbes magazine's Asia's 30 Under 30, a list of Asia's top social entrepreneurs.
Today, Dr. Chu will present findings from her analysis of mental health data from several thousand secondary school students that she has screened for suicide risk, as well as her work with IB schools. Without further ado, please join us in welcoming Dr. Jamie Chu.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful and cute introduction. To start with, I would like to share a story about a therapy patient of mine. Let's call her Megan. So Megan's a grade 10 student, and she's doing her MYP program. She came to see me because at the start of the school year, she started having anxiety. She started having panic attacks in school. When she comes to session, she always brings this little planner with her that's color-coded, sticky notes, color tabs. She's got a schedule and highlighter down to the hour. But she's very stressed out. She feels overwhelmed. She feels like I cannot not be working. No matter anything else she does, she feels guilty, and she thinks I could be studying instead. She stops going out with friends. She even stopped having dinner with her parents because she felt she could not afford the time. Now, Megan is a very hardworking student. She's high achieving. The teachers can see how hard she works. But every time she just scores something that's slightly below what she was expecting, she breaks down and she cries. Now, to put this a little bit in perspective about what this kind of anxiety in her body feels like, when research experiments try to elicit a stress response from what they call a healthy participant, this is what they do. So they bring them into a room where there's 3 researchers that's been instructed to look quite stern, sitting there. And then they're instructed to sit very still and watch this countdown timer that goes from 30 seconds down to 0. And when the timer gets down to 0, they're instructed to sit as still as they can and sing a song aloud. At which point then the researchers start pretending to make notes about the participant. And within 10 seconds, every single participant, their body starts going through stress. Their heart rates increase, their pupils dilate, they're starting to shake a little bit, and by the 10-second point of them singing, you can just see in their eyes going, when is this gonna stop? What am I doing? They're feeling stressed. And that's exactly what is going through in Megan's body every single day when she's experiencing that sense of anxiety. But when I talk to any other student from a high-achieving school, this is considered norm. All the behaviors that Megan is doing are considered normal amongst their peers. And so what is it that's making them so stressed out? And the concept of stress has been around for many years. In fact, 80 years ago, it was first coined by a medical doctor, Hans Silly, in 1936, where he observed that no matter what illnesses his patients had, they all came up with this common look. And what it was that they all looked generally ill, depressed, and tired. So he wanted to know what was going on in their bodies that would come up with this kind of consistent response. And so he went to experiment in rats, and what he discovered was vital to the stress research. And it was that no matter what you did to the rats, as long as the stress was for a long enough time, they all came up with the same response of looking tired and depressed and sick. And he coined that the stress response. And he famously said that, no matter what circumstances our bodies are put through, as long as it requires us to change and adapt, we will feel stress. And he even went so far as to say that stress cannot be avoided, since just staying alive creates some demand. Complete freedom from stress can be expected only after death. So at this point, it doesn't sound so bad, right? You know, we are supposed, as humans, to always grow, to adapt. That's how we, enhance productivity and performance. So what's going on with the kids today? Why are they falling apart? And what we see is that this is from 2018, that more than half of all students say that they don't feel like they're managing their stress. This is alarming. It's actually more stressful than adults are feeling, more stress than you and I, and we think we are stressed. Imagine what kids must feel, where more than half of them just feel they're not doing well. So having worked with a number of schools, and also with my insight in the therapy room, there are some things that I have noticed in the past 10 years that have changed. And perhaps not surprisingly, the first one is just that there is so much more competition. With this globalization and this growing middle class, which means that there's just a lot more applicants, a lot more people fighting for the same spots. And so with that comes the expectation of what makes the cut goes higher. So with Megan, she tells me that her dream school is Stanford. She's got her eyes set. 2 decades ago, the admission rate was about 15%. But last year, 95% of all applicants were rejected. And now this is not even all students. These are just the students who applied, which means these are all students who had an equal chance, perhaps, to be accepted. And only 5% were admitted. And by the time Megan starts applying, it would be even tougher. And she knows it, she's keenly aware of it, and that's why, even though she's only 15 years old, she's already working hard. She's doing all kinds of other activities that are not just academic-based. Because you've got these elite schools that say, well, good grades and scores, that's a given. That's the baseline. We want to see more. We want to see more of what makes you exceptional. We want to see qualities that show a strength of character, maturity. We want to see compelling life stories of you overcoming obstacles. In fact, the UPenn admissions dean said in an interview recently where he says, we want to see how far did they travel in their high school journey. So the pressure is real. And Megan knows it, and so she's joined MUN, she's doing violin lessons, she's going on math competitions, she's doing everything, ticking all the boxes, but at the very same time, she doesn't really know why she's doing those things, except to make her portfolio better. So what I see in a lot of these kids is that they have a passion for success, but they lack purpose. They lack purpose in knowing how they actually feel about the things they do. And in Asian societies, parents are well known to be demanding. Nothing has really changed in this front. 10 years ago, we all heard it, nothing but the best will do. Except today, parents are still saying that, nothing but the best will do, but what does best mean? That has changed. Best is now kind of a little bit unattainable. So one time, Megan comes to my office, and she's telling me about her PYP and how she's so stressed out. And she told me that, she was listing off all the criteria that she has to do and all the things that she has to demonstrate she's learned. She's feeling overwhelmed. She's not going to bed until 11:30 p.m. every single night. But the thing that she was most afraid of was disappointing her parents. She told me, I cannot have my teachers emailing my parents saying that I couldn't finish my work. And I said, well, what would your parents say to you? And she responds, they don't have to say anything. I can see it in their eyes. I can see the disappointment immediately. And this is not something that's new. Especially among Asian communities, kids have always had this high expectation being placed on them. But what we see is that high expectations is not a bad thing at all. In fact, high expectations really does challenge kids to strive, it pushes them to grow, and it also helps them develop purpose. But the key is that when it goes too far on the other end, where the child starts feeling overwhelmed and they start feeling afraid of disappointing, then that's when things start to fall apart. And so you see that the best has now become unattainable. And in the next slide here is some data that I've collected from high-achieving students. And this was from the 2018 to 19 academic year. And you can see that there's two humps. And what they are is rated along a depression scale. So on the one hand, you've got the low scores, and then the other hand, on the right, is the high scores. And you see this dotted line, which is the threshold, which means that students who score beyond that threshold are likely to be diagnosed with a depressive disorder. And what we see is the two humps is that the ones with the red students are the ones who said that their parents are a top source of stress and they're very scared of disappointing them. Whereas the students in the blue are also students that feel stressed by their parents, but they don't mention about the fear of disappointment. So these are students that feel like, well, yeah, my parents are stressing me out because they have really high expectations. And you see the stark difference in that the students who feel stressed by their parents and feel so afraid of disappointing them, their depression scores are much higher. In fact, close to half of them score above the threshold. So you can see that's where the parental expectation that becomes too much can be very damaging. And then the next slide here is something that's also kind of interesting to put in. So now here, those same two groups of students are rated across their academic stress. And you see that both groups are relatively just as high. And that's something that we see, is that no matter what kind of student you are, whether you have mental health issues or not, you would still feel academic stress. And I think that's just kind of what's happened now, is that you've got this pressure cooker environment where everybody knows that the baseline has increased, that what they need to do to be excellent has increased. But you can still see a slight difference in that the students who have that fear of disappointing their parents tend to associate school as to be much more stressful as well. Now, can we talk about mental health without mentioning social media? As we heard in Belinda's talk, we did see that social media is something that kids have grown up to use. We all use social media, for sure. We use our phones a lot. But if you watch a middle-aged person or even a 30-something-year-old person use their phone, you see that they're still kind of fumbling around. It's like, oh, what do I press here to tweet this out? But when you watch a kid, my nephew who's 2 years old knows how to FaceTime me and flip the camera to show me his toys. So you can see that they are natural at using it. So what is it about social media that can be damaging and increase the level of stress that a young person feels? And is that social media allows us on a platform never before seen to compare against one another. Kids these days are comparing themselves not just to their peers in their immediate environment, in their classroom, in their school. They're comparing themselves to teens globally, and that can be very damaging. But when teens go through the developmental stage, it is very normal for them to constantly want to know how they're measuring up against one another. And that's just normal because teens are trying to find their identity, they're trying to see how they fit in, they're trying to know the social hierarchies. So that's all normal. So then, it's inevitable that when they're scrolling through social media, that the same kind of behaviors come up of how do I measure up against someone else. So then why is it so bad? Why is it that you've got half of all teens that say social media makes them feel judged and makes them feel bad for who they are as a person? And yet, they can't stop using it. But to explain this, I want to talk about an experiment. So this is an experiment that was done back in the classical times when experimenting on animals was still considered ethical. So you've got this doctor. He did a famous experiment called the Mason's monkey experiment. And what he wanted to study was the effect of negative emotions. How does that compound with stress? Because for a long time, people just thought stress was purely physical, that it was just because when you're in a stressful, adverse condition, you would end up having stress. But he wanted to see how does emotions come to play. So he took a bunch of monkeys, and he starved them. And then he observed them, and he saw a very predictable decline where they started feeling depressed, they started getting distressed, and they were frustrated. And then he took another group of monkey, and he also starved them. But then with this group of monkey, he threw in a bit of a plot twist. And it was that they had to watch other monkeys eat bananas while they were hungry. Now, if you're a hungry monkey, you're going to be jealous of this guy. And so that's what he looked at was there a difference between monkeys who were just hungry versus those who had to watch monkeys eat bananas? And what do you think happened? Well, the ones who had to watch, they declined much more rapidly. Even when their body had not entered starvation mode, these monkeys started developing stomach ulcers. They were frustrated, they were angry, they were out of control, and they were so depressed and distressed. And why this is such an interesting experiment that I find still very applicable to today is because that's kind of how it is for teenagers on social media, right? We're kind of like this hungry monkeys, and what you see is this beautiful, curated, and edited highlight reel, and those are beautiful people eating beautiful bananas, and that's what we want, right? And so we're here as these starving monkeys comparing all of that to all the things we don't have. And when you take that into the normal development of a teenager, where they already do that, but at a smaller scale within the classroom. They're already comparing themselves to their peers, and now all of a sudden we amp that up to a global scale where everyone actually only posts good things online, their successes, the highlights, and every single other teen is just comparing that to their own messy, behind the scenes. What happens? You feel bad about yourself. You start, instill self-doubt. It makes you feel like you're not good enough. And so now all of this is starting to sound really bleak, and you're probably thinking, well, no wonder our kids are falling apart. Everything is just pointing to that direction. But here's where it does show us a little bit of a difference, is that when the whole baseline of stress is just increased, so everybody is experiencing a higher level of stress, well, what is it that makes some kids be able to weather that stress, whereas other kids start to struggle? And so now in my work as a therapist, I get to see all the ones who struggle. But what's also really, really important to highlight is that I also see all the ones who reverse that course of struggle, right? So they come to my room depressed and anxious. How do we get them to become more resilient and be able to weather the stress? Because they're still going to the same schools, they're still facing the same reality of having to excel and achieve. But at the same time, when I work with the schools, I get to see a bigger picture of what is it that then protects some of the kids, because they're all in the same school. So why do some students be able to mitigate the risk of stress, whereas some students don't? Now, early on when I was talking about the whole research around stress, one of the major things that Hans Seeley talked about was that when you put these rats or humans under stress for long enough, they will have a negative stress response. But then when we also then looked at the monkey experiments, we see that emotions played a big role. So the psychological factors really do make a big difference. And what it really comes down to, that we found, is a sense of control. And this is even more important now because, as we just heard from a previous speaker, the world is changing so rapidly in that the sense of control is even more vital for a young person to have. Because when a stressful situation is perceived as within your control, you feel like your effort and your behavior can make a meaningful impact to the stressful environment, what happens to the young person? They're able to use their problem-solving side of their brain. They're able to use the positive coping strategies. But for a young person who doesn't feel that way, young people who perceive that they're out of control, they're not able to tap into that problem solving. And you've probably all seen it too in your students. You see that they know what to do, but they just can't seem to use it. And that's exactly what's happening, is that they end up using this emotional side of problem solving, where their main focus is not to solve the problem, their main focus is to stop feeling bad and out of control. And so what they do is they procrastinate, they avoid things, they distract themselves, or they keep pushing themselves and pretend that nothing is going wrong until they break. And we see that happening in students all the time, where they're not able to problem solve. And so what is it then that can create this sense of control, especially when things are changing so rapidly, when during a period of adolescence, it is normal to feel like you're not able to do certain things, to feel pushed and challenged, to have to grow and feel stressed. And what I've seen to play one of the biggest role, and perhaps is not unsurprising, is parents. Parent relationships predict sense of control in young people. And as a therapist working with a lot of struggling kids, I always see two spectrums to the parent. You've got the one side of the parents where it's very typical Thai mom, where the message is always, you need to do better. We expect more from you. You can do better. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, where this sometimes I see more with younger parents, especially with millennial parents, where they tell the kid, the message is, you are special, you are exceptional, you're the smartest, you are the best. And now both of these kids and both of these messages, it feels inadequacy. And why is that? So these kids go to school, they face setbacks, they get put into situations where they don't know what they're supposed to do. And the one who keeps receiving that message of, you can do better, you must do better, they start internalizing that as, I need to do better. And so they feel inadequate, and they operate from the standpoint of, I must. And so everything they do is always, I must do it. It is never, I want, or I would like to, or I think I can. It's always, I must. Now, on the other hand, the really special, exceptional kid goes to school and finds out that he's not that special anymore. There are things he doesn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, this kid thinks, well, I thought I was smart, so I guess I'm not smart in the end. And they operate from this standpoint of, I can't. And so a lot of them start feeling, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. So then what happens? Can we have a middle ground? And so it turns out a sense of control really stems from when a child starts to feel supported, encouraged, and motivated by the parents, and when the message that they internalize is, the parents tell them is that, I don't know if you're going to succeed or fail, but I believe you're capable to problem solve and learn and grow and work through this. And so all of a sudden, it's not about how well they've done or what they've done or how smart they are, but it's more about their capability and their ability to grow. And so these students are more likely to feel that they have the ability to exert some kind of change in their stressful environment. So now what happens with all the young people who don't have that kind of parental relationship? Are they screwed? So no. Good news is that adults can come in to buffer the risk. And so this is where my role as a therapist comes in, and also for teachers. Every day, I hear students tell me about the teachers that care about them and show an interest in them. And the really key thing here is that this has to come from the perspective of the teenager, of the child. So it's not so much about what the adults think they're doing, but it's more like, does the student perceive it from their side of the story? And so one of the really important things to highlight is that for an adult to become a protective factor for a child, it's not about just caring about them or being nice to them. Lots of teachers are nice and lots of teachers care about them, but the student doesn't necessarily feel it. They just feel like, well, you have to do this because that's your job. And so what makes a difference is when the young person feels that there's an adult who actually invests time in them and who shows a keen interest in who they are as an individual. And this is a really important thing, is as an individual, and not as their achievements, not how smart they are, not what they're capable of, but who they are, just as they are. And you find that if we reflect on a moment, this is something that has become quite rare, where we actually ask a kid, hey, how are you? And we want to know more about them. We want to know who are they as a person. Because what I've noticed is that when adults interact with young people, we always want something from them. We're always chasing them for work. We're asking them, have they done stuff yet? Have they done this? Have you met this deadline? Very rarely do we just don't ask anything from them, but we just want to know who they are. And when young people feel that, amazing things start to happen because they then start to develop this sense of capability and competency, and that's how they can start engaging that problem-solving part of their brain and utilize positive coping skills. And so what we find in our data analysis as well, which is quite interesting, because early on in the talk, there was also mention about like machine learning, automation. So when I was in grad school, I had to do a lot of statistics for my research, but all of that, you had to like click lots of things and do manually lots of things. And so it was very limited in what I knew, in my own knowledge, and also what the peer research was out. Because all of that was to inform how I would then go about to manipulate the data and to investigate what was meaningful. But now, when we have so much more data being collected, so much more variables being assessed, this is where it does get very interesting. So for example, here is an aggregate data view of all the students who rated how well they felt understood by an adult male and an adult female in their life. So for a lot of students, this is their parents, but for some of them, it could be another significant adult in their life. And so you can see that it's a little bit hard to see or make meaning of it. Now let's make it a little bit even more complex and throw in more variables. So now it's not just about how well they feel understood, but how well do they feel they can communicate with each of these adults. So all of a sudden now it's no longer a 2D chart, but it's a 4D chart because you've got 4 variables and 4 axes that we're measuring on. So each point is now hovering in a space. So how would we make sense of it? And that is where machine learning can really be awesome. I love it. It can really help us create meaning out of seemingly overwhelming data. And so for example, if we apply what we call a cluster analysis to see, so the machine is the algorithm, then tests for, are there meaningful ways to group these students? Can we actually see that based on how they communicate and based on how well they feel understood, can there be meaningful groups that come out of it? And so so here we see there's 5 groups, but if we just simplified it to 3 groups, and then we map these 3 groups against their depression symptoms, what do we see? We see distinct patterns emerging. So this is very interesting in that how well a student feels understood by an adult, how well they feel they can communicate with them, is very much linked with their depressive symptoms that they're feeling. And so you see in group number 1 on the red hump, and you see that dotted threshold line. So again, you see that half of all the kids who have this bad relationship or who don't feel understood, maybe that's a better way to say, who don't feel understood by either a male or an adult adult male or female in their life, you see that half of them score above the threshold for what might be diagnosed as clinical depression. And so you can see how this is so important that as adults, we do step in to reverse the trend and to protect the kids. Whereas group number 3, you see that these are students who rated their relationships as feeling well understood and they communicate well. And so they feel good about these adult relationships that they're having. And their depression scores are largely in the safe zone where they don't experience higher depression scores. So this is just a bit of a simplified example of how the kind of like data analysis that can come from a tool that captures mental health data can provide and show meaningful insights as to what we can do. Because for a long time, as a psychologist, we know that adult relationships are key. But this is where data and evidence can back it up. And if we all make it a goal for us, that in the coming days and weeks and the rest of the school year, that we all make that extra step to get to know a student for who they actually are. We try to find out, what do they like? What music do they listen to? What do they like? What are their hopes and ambitions that's outside of academics? And we can really be a protective factor for them. And the really key thing to also highlight here is that it doesn't require every adult to do this. You really just need one adult, and we see in our data, the best is having one male and one female, but even just having one in the green zone, you'll see that most of those kids are still buffered from risk. It is the students who have neither that are at highest risk. So that means, as an adult, you could just pay attention to one kid in your class every month, one kid in your class every semester, and you could be making a difference in their lives and protecting them against how they respond and cope with the stress that's being placed on them. And so when we as adults make that extra effort to show this genuine interest in who they are as individuals, we can protect kids from the risk of depression and anxiety in a world where stress is ever increasing for them. Thank you.
Good morning. I've got a loud voice. My name is David Butcher. I'm the principal of the British School Jakarta, and I'm also the vice chair of the IB Heads Council. It's my pleasure to be on stage with Dr. Jamie. Thank you. I think another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, please.
Thank you.
We're going to facilitate some Q&As that have been coming throughout the keynote that Dr. Jamie's been doing. I'd just like to thank the IB for starting a conference with a topic that involves all of us. Hive spoke this morning about Generation IB. Belinda spoke about Generation Alpha. It doesn't matter what we call them. In this day and age, we have the problem of depression and stress with our students, and anything that we can do to make that better, I think is better for our profession. So well done, IB. The questions have been varied. To the person who wants to know where the toilet is, out the door, turn right, and keep walking. Thank you.
Very logical.
I think it's on the left-hand side. I'm going to start with one which actually reverts back to Belinda. in her speech, and it is with regards the stress that the IB puts on students, and just a plea to the IB to talk to the universities, to talk to them about assessment and the entrance into tertiary at this moment. It isn't working, and the stress that we all feel, and when you're a head of school or a DP coordinator or a teacher, the push and pull on how to deal with that stress is a daily occurrence for us. So please, IB, I implore you to go back to the universities and talk to them, and let's get it right. Thank you. So one of the first questions was about how we can actually help the students from a different perspective of age groups. From what's the youngest that you've worked with, and how have you dealt with them with stress?
This is very interesting, because just last week I was at a school where I was working with their year 7 students, because they had just gone through a mental health screening with us. And I went in to, see how things are going, to do a bit of a school visit, and to also check in with some of the students that had completed the screening. And I worked with the school counselor, and she told me that there were a few students that did come through the screening who showed high anxiety and depression. And when she talked to them, she just said she was shocked. Because she told me, she said, I can't believe it, but 4 out of the 8 kids that scored really high in the depression told me that they had started thinking about suicide in primary school. And she said that it came when they were in year 5 already. Year 5 and year 6 was when they first had the thought of, why is life so hard? Maybe I should just die. And this is shocking, because we see that trend kind of shifting younger and younger. We're now having more primary schools asking us to do mental health screenings, even though for a long time it was not necessarily recommended, because they thought that kids at such a young age may not be capable of self-reporting their own feelings. But we're seeing that kids as young as primary 5 are starting to have self-harm and suicidal ideation. And so one thing that I think schools can really do on what improves the relationship between kids who are struggling and getting them to come forward to seek help is not just on the school climate building up, but what can really build up trust is having transparency around what happens. Because a lot of kids are afraid of their parents finding out, a lot of kids are afraid of peers knowing, and most of the time these fears are really based in misconceptions. They're based in rumors that they've heard from other teenagers and other kids. And so that's why it's really important if the school consistently addresses what happens and how does the counselor support you, how can teachers support you when you're feeling stressed and anxious and depressed, then kids are more likely, that I've seen, more likely to come forward to seek help.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. A member of the audience put in what I think is a very good one, is kind of a case study. I have a student who has the problems like Dr. Jamie shared. She's good at the violin, she's good at maths and everything. Now she is sick and she's dropping out of her final examinations. How can I help her?
That's a great question. And I think whoever sent you this question is that it already shows that you are really caring about the student. And so there was one thing that I heard from another teacher, which I think is brilliant, and I would like to share it as an example, is that when a student got sick and didn't come back to school, what the teacher did was they got all the students to write a note of concern for this student who was not able to come in. So to let them know that we're missing you and that we're thinking of you. And then what the teacher did was that they just spent 30 seconds as a whole class sending the sick student some good vibes and good thoughts. So I feel like this is really important because it sounds like a very simple thing, but then the really important key is to what's happening here is that the student who's sick doesn't feel left out, and they feel that there's this community where I belong, and they're really wanting and rooting for me to go back. And I think that can be really powerful to instill.
Good, thank you. I hope that's helpful to the person who put that question out. Does culture play a role in causing stress to students? You spoke about the Tiger Mums, you've got West East, you've got a global phenomenon in the IB. How can culture affect stress, and how can you deal with those different type of cultures in your work?
That's a really big topic. We can talk forever about this. For sure, culture plays a big role, but what I see is that where it can be detrimental is when there's like this need to put up a image of some sort, and where they associate having mental health struggles as being weaker or as seen as a failure. And so I think no matter what culture you come from, but when we have that thought and that belief, then that's when it does kind of filter through into the kids, and they adopt and internalize that message as well. And so one thing that can be really powerful in mitigating this kind of stigma and feeling like it's a failure is for people to share their personal stories or have more kind of opportunities where students or even parents are exposed to these kind of story sharing of individuals who have gone through or live with mental health issues, but either have overcome or they're sharing about their strategies of how they do it. And so, for example, in our work, when we work with a lot of Chinese students, so we work with both local schools in Hong Kong and also international schools abroad. And what we really do see is that for especially the Chinese culture, it really works when you share the story. So for example, in our app that we do with the kids, we have different people sharing their stories. One of them is myself, where I share about my struggles as a teen with depression and anxiety and bulimia. And we do find that students really respond very well to it. And they feel like, oh, if you are able to open up and talk about this, then maybe I can as well. So I think setting that example is really important when working with different cultures.
Brilliant, thank you. One question, sort of technical one. How many students were in your studies that you've been going through? What's this kind of catch of how
okay. So we work with about 20,000 students every year. And so the data that I just showed you was from the 2018 to 2019 school year, but then we separated out the public schools from it. So it's about half of that.
Brilliant, thank you. This is going to be my last question, and I'm going to go a little bit rogue, if I may.
Sure.
You've got a room full of educators. What about our stress? How can you help us?
That's a good question too. I really do think it's difficult because, whenever I talk to teachers tell me that they're expected to do everything. Now they have to even be the parent of the child if they don't have that strong parent relationship. So I think, it is so important for teachers as well to protect their own well-being. But one thing that I think works well for teachers is comes down to similar to students, right? Like what can help students to mitigate stress is by having that sense of purpose and having a sense of control. And I think when teachers also feel that, there's a sense of purpose, and that's why I think organizational purpose is really important when teachers feel like they're not just going in but teaching, but they're really making a difference in kids' life, and that they feel like they're part of this they belong, there's a sense of community, and there's also really, I think it's also really important to support each other. So I was talking to a principal a few months back when she retired. So she had been principal for 50 years or something, and she retired, and she told me that what she found to work the best was to always assume the position that there are no bad teachers. So she would always try to groom them. And what she did was she organized one-on-one sessions with every teacher every single year so that every single staff in her school would have this one-on-one chance with her. And she told me that she felt like that really did help to encourage some of the teachers who were struggling a little bit.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the International Baccalaureates, and on everybody here today, Dr. Jamie, I'd like to give you a token of appreciation. Thank you so much.
Maybe take a picture or?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As a veteran of many IB conferences, I hope that you've got many takeaways from Belinda, Hyfe, and Dr. Jamie this morning, and I hope that the conversations over lunch will be productive, proactive in what is a massive topic for us in our privileged world of IB education. Have a wonderful conference, and thank you for your attention this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie and David. There will be a meet and greet session with Jamie from 1:30 to 2 p.m. today at the IB booth. This concludes the plenary session for today, and have a fruitful day ahead. Thank you.